Let's go to our guests now. Mariam Solaimankhail is a member of Afghanistan's parliament. Javid Faisal was the deputy spokesman for the Chief Executive of Afghanistan. Jarrett Blanc was the US's acting special representative for Afghanistan under President Obama. And here with me in the studio is journalist Fariba Nawa. She's the author of One Woman's Journey Through Afghanistan. Good to have you all on the panel. Mariam, let me start with you. The Taliban brazen in its attacks, attacking aid workers, killing with impunity, even in Ramadan. Does this mean, for many Afghans, that you cannot talk to this group?
First of all, thank you for having me on TRT today, Imran Jan. But I don't think it means that we can't talk to them, but it does signal that maybe they're not taking the talks as seriously as they should be, or the countries who are supporting them might have more of a power over them than we might have originally thought.
Javed, why would the Taliban be attacking?
But I do think that there's still a chance in speaking.
Certainly. Javed, why would the Taliban be attacking these so-called soft targets?
I think this is not something new for us. When we talk about Taliban, they have always been attacking the soft targets in Afghanistan, be the Afghan people or the international assistant or aid workers in Afghanistan. I think at this critical time, they are attacking the aid workers and soft targets to make sure that they are entering with more weight to the peace talks with the Americans. As we are headed to the peace talks, Taliban should definitely be looking forward to having an upper hand in the talks. And their belief, unfortunately, still remains on attacking the soft targets. But we, as Afghans, we don't see this as a good move towards peace, because if you are willing to talk to us, if you are willing to talk to the Americans or the Afghans and be part of the picture in Afghanistan, you have to show willingness. And willingness can be shown when there is a reduction in violence, when they work to build trust on themselves, because the Afghan people in the national community do not trust Taliban. They have always been a terrorist group. They have never shown positive intents for peace in Afghanistan. If they continue to do so, on one hand, to continue talking to the Americans, and on the other hand, continue to kill Afghans, I don't think this will take us anywhere. But it surely is an effort to bargaining in the peace process.
Okay, so let me ask Jarrett Blanc then. So we have them attacking counterpart rather, and CARE, and they also told the Red Cross and the World Health Organization that they are potential targets. They shouldn't be working in the areas of their control. Would that change the calculus at all for Zalmay Khalilzad and for the Americans while they're negotiating with the Taliban? They see the Taliban attacking these NGOs. Would that change anything?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. Turkey plays a critical role in Afghanistan, a critical role in any potential peace process, and so it's really a pleasure to be with you. The answer is that attacks like this are tragic. They are, I think, a mistake on the Taliban's part. They're also probably not unexpected. There is no ceasefire in place. The parties have not yet agreed to one. And peace talks often proceed in advance of ceasefires. And so for now, I think the only possible way forward is to continue to work on the peace talks, try to get to a ceasefire, but recognize that that might come later in the process. And in the meantime, it's necessary for the United States, for other Afghan actors, to start to sketch out what a post-conflict future with an integrated Taliban can look like in Afghanistan.
Fariba Nawa, in addition to the NGO attacks, we've had the fatal shooting of a former TV journalist and parliamentary advisor, Mina Mangal. Lots of speculation as to what was behind this, who was behind this. But with all of that in mind, NGOs being attacked, journalists being killed, is it possible for people to draw a line between where we are right now and a possible peace while all of this is going on?
It's a difficult thing, because right now the Taliban are trying to rebrand themselves as pro-women, but that's not what we're seeing on the ground. In places where they control, women are not in charge at all. It's just the way it used to be. And this attack wasn't necessarily, from what I'm hearing, politically motivated. But these attacks have been happening. There have been assassinations by the Taliban of women working in the government and otherwise.
Right. And Mariam Solaimankhail, when we look at the NGO attacks, the Taliban spokesman in the aftermath saying one of the reasons why Counterpart was attacked was because they engage in moral corruption, which the Taliban says is the mixing of men and women. So with that in mind, would the Afghan government and the Americans need to throw Afghan women under the bus in order to reach peace with this group?
I think this is a really important point for the Afghan government, for most of the Afghans who live in Afghanistan as well, where that is our red line. Basic liberties, women's rights, equality. These are things that we're not going to sacrifice. We have women in parliament, we have women in ministerial positions, we have women on local governments levels, and they're all very competent women. So we've come a far way, we have a long way to go, but this is something I don't think this government will budge on, even though peace is our #1 priority, no matter what. But these rights are something that we're not going to negotiate on.
Javid Faisal, is it going to be easy to get the Taliban to agree that, listen, all that progress made on women's rights, you cannot reverse if we have peace with you?
The way we have come forward so far, I don't think this route can take us to the ultimate goal, the destination that we are planning to go, because, the US entered into a dialogue with Taliban without asking anything from them. So if you are entering into talks with Taliban, their request for 18 years, you are listening to them to talk to them, what did you get in return? For Taliban, it's something. When you are talking to them, the Americans, when they sit with Taliban, it's a reward for the Taliban. It's not for the Americans or the Afghan people or the government. So first of all, when you are giving this reward to Taliban, ask something in return. That could have been reduction in violence. That could have been no to attacking the major urban cities. That could have been, let's say, a ceasefire at least for some time. But the Americans did not get anything in return. They sit with the Taliban, and if talks fail tomorrow, let's hope it doesn't. Fingers crossed, we get the final result out of it. But let's say it doesn't work the way we want it.
Okay, Javid.
The losses that we have is the Taliban have gotten more ground today, and they are politically recognized.
Javid, I wonder how you read what Zalmay Khalilzad said when he said, we are getting into the nitty-gritty. The devil is always in the details. When he says that, what do you think he's talking about?
Well, to be honest, it's so messed up. We are hoping an ultimate solution through talks to the long or the prolonged war in Afghanistan. But the way it has gone so far, I don't think it is taking us anywhere. There has to be a review into this. We have to look back at where we were, where we have come, and where we have to be moved. If it goes this way, I personally have so many concerns about the future, because we are just giving away so many things in return of nothing. There had to be something taken from them, some guarantees or at least something. Taliban from day one were saying that we are talking to the Americans, not the Afghan government or the people. Still today, after 18 years, Americans agreed to talk to the Taliban, but Taliban did not say anything about talking to the Afghan people or agreeing to a ceasefire or at least something. So I think we have not moved in the right direction. It could be the right direction, but the tactics we have used so far, the way we have taken for us forward, is not the right way. There has to be changes, and the Afghan government should be part of it. There has to be something taken from Taliban too. If you are giving them something, they have to give us something too.
Jarrett Blanc, is Javid Faisal right that the US made a mistake going into these talks with no clear preconditions, not asking for anything from the Taliban in return, and not inviting the Afghan government to come and join them in Doha? Was that a mistake?
No, I firmly disagree. For many years, we in the United States, I myself, tried to impose preconditions on talks with the Taliban. And what they always ended up being was an insurmountable block to starting real negotiations. I think my friend Javid is wrong that we're not moving in the right direction. We are moving in the right direction. We're just moving very slowly. And that's not surprising given the length and ferocity of this conflict. It is going to take time to work through the issues between the United States and the Taliban, the issues between Taliban and the government and the rest of Afghan society. One thing I do very much want to say, though, is that I agree completely with the idea that there is no peace that ignores the rights and accomplishments of women in Afghanistan. And the United States retains a substantial amount of leverage to help shape an intra-Afghan settlement which protects the achievements of women in Afghanistan over the course of the last 20 years. The way for us to use that leverage is to stop squabbling, frankly, with the government of Afghanistan, for the government of Afghanistan to stop squabbling with its opposition, but to work together to use the points of leverage that the United States retain.
Okay. Okay, Mariam, I wonder what you think about what Sher Mohammed Abbas Stanigzai said. This was a sort of closed-door meeting in Doha, only with the Taliban and their friends, and some fascinating reports coming out of this. This was from Voice of America, right? So he says, God has helped us defeat 3 superpowers in the last century. The third superpower that we are currently confronted with is also on the verge of defeat. Inshallah, you will soon hear they will also withdraw from Afghanistan, either of their own accord or they will be forced out. So while the talks are ongoing in Doha with the Americans, this is what the Taliban are saying among themselves. Basically, we're going to wait it out and the Americans will leave with their tails between their legs. What does that tell you, Mariam?
That tells me that the Taliban have a strong backing and a strong financial support behind them. And if we're really serious about bringing peace into Afghanistan, peace into this region, and peace into the world in the long term, we need to find out where the funding is coming from and cut that off. I think that's the most important piece that we can work on.
Fariba Nawa, all of this, we're looking at the attacks on the NGOs, the attack on journalists, the insecurity in the country, the fact that the Taliban has swallowed up so much of the country. Is all of this a sign that you should not be talking to them until they change, or that it's more of a sign that you need to go back and change the way you talk to them?
I would say the latter. You change the way you talk to them. Here's how I see it. The Taliban have won the war. That's how they see it. They're the ones in charge. They're calling the shots. Whether it's women's issues, how the international community will be involved, they get to decide. But that's not really what's on the ground, because even if they come into power, they have to get the support of the Afghan people. And I think the Afghan people are really trying with this Loya Jirga that was just in place, the resolutions that came out of it. They also need to start listening, because this idea that they're going to take over again and it will be all in their hands again isn't going to happen. Afghanistan is, obviously, you've heard this before, it's not what it was 18 years ago, especially for women. Women will fight back. Where I come from in Herat, women are burning themselves to death right now in protest. And that's a really strong statement. And you can't go back. And the Taliban need to hear this. They need to hear what the Afghan people are saying. Just like the Americans or the Russians couldn't quiet the Afghans with their bombs and bullets, neither can the Taliban.
There's a New York Times editorial, Fariba, which said, well, the headlines, the unspeakable war, the conflict in Afghanistan is going badly, and the Trump administration doesn't want to talk about it. Do you agree?
Absolutely. We are being thrown under the bus, especially the Afghan women. We were used as the reason to fight this war.
Right.
And now no one in the US is really talking about this. The media is covering it in bits and pieces, but this is not a subject anybody wants to talk about.
And Jarrett, to add to that, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, Segar, we used to get those quarterly reports telling us how much territory the Taliban has, telling us death tolls and so on. That's winding down, and the US public won't really have access to that anymore. Is that something that's deliberate from the Trump administration? It's, nothing to see here. The war's just continuing forever and ever, and don't ask questions?
Well, there does seem to be a deliberate lack of transparency from the Trump administration. I wouldn't say that it's in the spirit of the war is lasting forever and ever, don't ask questions. I think, if anything, the Trump administration is indicating a strong desire to end the war, hopefully through a negotiated settlement. But President Trump himself has indicated that if that's not possible, he may simply pull the plug, which is where you really start to have a problem, both for U.S. security and also for the security of the Afghan people. But a lot of ideas have been thrown out here. The government of Afghanistan should be more involved. There should be more pressure on the Taliban sources of financing, on their foreign backers. These are all fine ideas. They're all ideas that we have tried over and over again over the nearly 20 years of the U.S. engagement in this phase of Afghan civil war. The real bottom line is this, though. every time the United States has passed up an opportunity to make a deal with the Taliban, we found ourselves in a weaker position. This is the best moment to make a deal with the Taliban since the last opportunity, and it's going to be better than the next opportunity. This is the moment to try to come to some kind of political settlement with all of the challenges, with all of the risks associated, because there simply isn't a better option.
Jarrett, would you say it's accurate that the Trump administration is just looking for the first opportunity to save face and get out, wants to get out without looking embarrassed?
Well, I think, as is often the case, there is not a single Trump administration or a single Trump administration policy. President Trump himself, I think, has made quite clear that he wants to end U.S. military engagement in Afghanistan. I think that there are other elements of the administration who have a very different view and have so far constrained his ability to act upon that view. And so that gives you this kind of tenuous moment of balance where it's possible to try to use the U.S. remaining leverage to get a decent deal. The longer this drags on, then you run a risk that President Trump simply decides to proceed without a deal.
Right. And the reason why we haven't heard from or seen Javid or Mariam in the past few minutes is because there's a power cut in Kabul. So just to let you know, we'll try and get them back for the last few minutes. If we cannot, that would be unfortunate. But let's continue, because this discussion never ends, Fariba. There's just so many moving parts here. And a lot of the time, it feels like Groundhog Day every time there's a Taliban attack and we try to analyze and so on. It seems as if there's fundamentally something broken here. And the group with nothing to lose is always the Taliban. Are people right when they say that the Taliban's just waiting the Americans out and waiting this government out?
Yes, that's how I see it. But once they come back, it's not as easy as they think it'll be.
Why?
Because they're not going to be able to control Afghanistan the way they did in 2000, before the American, 2001, before the American intervention. It has changed. You have a much more educated urban community, and even in rural communities. I was talking to Afghan women who have traveled in the provinces and spoken to people. People are much more aware. You've had an information revolution inside Afghanistan in the last 18 years. They know what's going on now. They know what they don't want and what they want. If they're going to rule with an iron fist, using psychological torture, yeah, anywhere that works. But for how long?
Fariba, in the absence of peace, in the absence of a ceasefire, we heard from the Taliban, from Zabihullah Mujahid, saying the Kabul attack on counterpart is not the last attack. So presumably more attacks on NGOs. Given the current state of things on the ground in the country, what would an Afghanistan look like without the NGOs? Because I, for example, have friends who have been evacuated from Afghanistan right now because it's too unsafe. What would it look like without the NGOs and the work they do?
It would be dismal. You have 2,000 NGOs on the ground doing some imperative work that nobody else is doing and has been doing it for 40 years. They have the experience. Yes, there's corruption in development and how the work is done, but without the NGOs, without the hospitals, without the Red Cross, which the Taliban are not allowing in their areas right now, people are the ones who are suffering. The civilians are the ones who are suffering. They have to travel to different provinces where there are clinics and hospitals. So I don't see the Afghanistan of 2000, which I went under the Taliban, which I visited, was like the city of the dead, especially in Kabul. And so how are they planning to, where is the expertise? What are they going to do once they come? This is the question. I don't think, there was a group of Afghan-American women who met with them for 6 hours in Doha. This was a breakthrough, I thought. And when I talked to these women, I said, well, what details? Again, what are they going to do differently? There wasn't much to be said other than, okay, we're going to let people go to school, we're going to let the women go to school, go to work, but what else? The details are problematic because I don't even know if they have a strategy, if they have a plan. Right now, everything's about force. We're going to take over and then what? Bring Sharia law? You already have Islam in Afghanistan. It's in the education system. What kind of religion are they going to bring that's different? It's the extreme one that few Afghans actually believe in.
Jarrett, Fariba's painted a fairly depressing scene right now, and she's not very optimistic about what comes ahead. Do you understand it?
Well, I understand it. It's very difficult to be optimistic and very easy to be pessimistic about Afghanistan. That said, I think there's been far too much speculation. There is too much speculation about whether or not the Taliban has changed. Do they have a different vision of governance than they had before? Do they have different ambitions than they had before? I don't know. I don't think, frankly, even they know the answer to that question.
Right.
What has changed most certainly is the rest of Afghanistan. They are confronting a much stronger counterforce than they did when they took over in 1995, both militarily, economically, socially. And that means, I believe, that it is possible to structure a peace deal that kind of recognizes the balance of force on the ground and creates an equilibrium that reflects the real power. And what that would do, in effect, is make it very, very costly for anybody to seek to defect from the peace deal, including the Taliban, and to seek a kind of more conclusive ultimate victory. That's what the United States and our allies and partners in Afghanistan need to be focused on right now.
Okay, and I'm delighted to let you all know that the power's back in Kabul. So, just enough time for a final comment from Javid and from Mariam. Mariam, you go first. Final comments, please.
So I am a parliamentarian for the Kuchi tribe, and the Kuchi tribe is on the front line of this war. On one side of the war, most people claim that they're Taliban, and on the other side, the Taliban are claiming, why aren't you a Talib? Come join us. I've traveled through 15 provinces, and I do believe a key component that's missing in these peace talks is a Kuchi representation. These people are the ones who are the most trained from childhood on the art of jargon, in the art of negotiations, and the people who are being recruited on the front line, the people who are getting killed on the front line are the Kuchi people. They also understand where the enemies are, where they're being trained, where the threat is coming from. So I believe strongly that the Kuchi people need to be part of this this dialogue, even if the government isn't going to be part of it or they're not being accepted, which I think is a huge mistake. The Kuchi people are a crucial part that needs to be taken seriously.
Okay, interesting point there. Javid Faisal, final word from you.
Again, I would go back to my conversation earlier. The way we have taken should have some changes to it. As long as there is continued support for Taliban within Pakistan, as long as Pakistan do not change its policy towards Afghanistan and towards support of terrorism, as long as Taliban do not change, and we see they have not changed even by an inch, I don't think we are going to reach anywhere. Too much focus on the issues within Afghanistan is not going to take us to peace. But more focus on Pakistan, more focus on Taliban, and more focus on China, Russia, and Iran is definitely going to help us and get us to a lasting peace in Afghanistan. So that is where we have to focus more and make sure that the Afghans are playing better part, better role in it than they have done in the past.
Okay, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Mariam Solaimankhail, Javid Faisal, Jarrett Blanc, and Fariba Nawa. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Thanks for having us.